I want to thank all of you for being here and paying for my plane fare. And especially I want to thank Sherry Boyer, who set this up, to Steve Hendricks, who's the vice president of the ICAA, and who took good care of me and took me to that most beautiful art museum up the street for lunch. And there's a lot of you that I should be thanking, people I've worked with in the past, artists, artisans, architects, people that I admire. I want to thank you all for being here in this magnificent cathedral. I want to especially thank these two architects. I don't know if you know who they are. One did the 19th century galleries at the Met, Alvin Holm, who just introduced me, and John Blateau, two of our greatest American architects, and they happen to live here in the city of brotherly love. So I also want to thank Pope Francis, because he's really the reason that we're here, and they wouldn't have invited me if he weren't coming a few days from now. It's very exciting that he's coming to Philadelphia on his whirlwind tour, and it reminds me of 1979 when his predecessor, St. John Paul II, came, and you see this beautiful vision of Ben Franklin Parkway, and it's going to be even better this time. So, as you know, Philadelphia is the birthplace of freedom. It's also one of our greatest classical cities. And when I think of your fair city, these are some of the buildings I think of. I grew up here and really love the library, the art museum, of course, with that amazing stair, and the Athenaeum, and most importantly, John Wanamaker's. What a great place for a little kid to go to. Now, Philadelphia, of course, is a great city of classical architecture. It's also fantastic for houses of worship, and one of them that I think of is the first Anglican church, Christ Church, where many of our founding fathers worshiped or visited, and just a magnificent building. It's so magnificent, and we don't even know who the architect was. And I must say, it has inspired my work recently in designing a new chapel in the Midwest for a college chapel. A couple of other buildings that I'm a big fan of. Do you know the Jesu, St. Joe Prep? This is the parish church, now the chapel for the Jesuit high school. It's designed by Durang, and near to my heart because this is where my grandfather and many of my uncles' relatives went to school, and I happen to be designing a much simpler version right now in Florida. And then the wonderful St. Francis de Sales, with one of the most beautiful and largest Guastavino tile vaults, 65 feet. Amazing building that's been preserved. And we happen to be designing a building right now using that same technology, not on the inside, but on the outside. That front portico is based on a Guastavino tile vault, a complete dome. And of course, this amazing cathedral, which we all, you can use your own eyes to see how magnificent it is. Started by Napoleon Lebrun, of French extraction, with a facade by Notman. Now, this is a drawing of Notman's, what we think Notman was planning to do on the outside, and it clears up a couple of the things that I've always wondered about the cathedral, which is, why isn't the dome more grand? What was supposed to be? and they ran out of money. And then, why are the outsides of the front curved with columns? And also, why aren't there any bell towers? Well, they were supposed to be 2 little bell towers on the front of St. Peter and Paul. Obviously inspired by the great Renaissance tradition of churches found in Rome, and appropriately having some reference to, it's called St. Peter and Paul, reference to the great basilica in Rome of St. Peter. This drawing that you're seeing is Napoleon Lebrun's drawing. And it's interesting because he plans on it. See how the back of the wall behind the altar is flat? But you can just see hazy, you can just see an apse planned in there. You can also see that there's a baldacchino planned. So this is something that Napoleon Lebrun was thinking about. And of course, which is St. Peter's again? Which is the cathedral? You see the resemblance. This photograph from about 1917 tells a few stories. Look at it. The building is built originally with a back wall, flat wall, with a high altar. And what we have today actually was put into place in 1957 by John Russell Pope's successor firm. Eggers and Higgins did that wonderful apse with marble columns and the baldacchino, all foreseen by Napoleon Lebrun, but not done until 1957. And then, because I grew up in this town and have visited it a few times, I'm sure it was in my consciousness when we designed a little church in Wisconsin. So I would like to talk about a new Renaissance, the church as patroness of the arts. What contributions has the Catholic Church made to society in her 2,000-year history? Many of the modern institutions that we are most proud of, colleges and hospitals in particular, were founded and maintained by the Church, and we are beneficiaries. I think most of us also acknowledge that the world of art, architecture, and music, the Church has been a major force and patron up until the 20th century. What happened? In the 20th century, the arts moved away from the Church and found more appealing patrons in the civic and private realms. The interest in concepts such as primitivism, the occult, abstraction, disfigurement, and even iconoclasm by artists and the elite generally did not sit well with the Catholic Church. Understandably, she moved away from mainstream art. After World War II in Europe, there was an embrace of modernist art and architecture by some in the Church, as witnessed by the work commissioned by Father Couturier. Here you see, on the left, the church at Assy, France, where a number of very well-known modernist and unbelieving artists were commissioned to produce art, including Matisse, Chagall, Fernand Léger. And then on the right, the monastery of La Tourette, where the preeminent architect of the day, Le Corbusier, an avowed pagan, was hired to invent a new type of monastery for the Dominicans. Father Couturier said that it was better to have a talented unbeliever as an artist. Quote, excellence and artistic sincerity were to come before faith and piety. The situation today is complex. On the one hand, we see a movement which continues to take cues from secular art and architecture. This is most clear in major and enormously expensive projects such as the cathedrals in Oakland and Los Angeles, the chapel at Ave Maria University, and the proposed renovation of a Protestant megachurch in Orange, California, into a Catholic cathedral. On the other hand, we see a desire for traditional architecture, but done in a mediocre way due to modest budgets or the limited knowledge of artists and architects. And I particularly like the one on the left, which is kind of a pseudo-Gothic church, and they couldn't really afford to have columns to hold up the arches. Given our present predicament, there seem to be many more important things for the church to invest in than in the arts. So why should she do it? For the same reasons that the church historically invested in the arts. Not only can the arts symbolize that which is beyond us, but art and architecture can point us away from the material towards the immaterial. I would suggest that Notre Dame Cathedral, St. Peter's Basilica, and the Sistine Chapel are recognized by people as beautiful, profound, and moving, whether they have faith or not. So where are the Notre Dame cathedrals being built today? Some would say Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. How can we in our time offer an image of the eternal to modern man in the American context? An image that can help form modern man and help form the art and architecture even of the secular realm. What is patronage? True patronage is the support and promotion of the arts through generous funding. Arts patronage exists in the world and is crucial to the existence of so many of our arts institutions which we value: museums, ballet, opera, symphony orchestras. So too the art of the church. As patroness, the church will focus mainly on art in service of the church and the liturgy. But she will also seek to influence the manifestation of the arts in the secular realm. Nurtured by her tradition, the church has a clear vision about the importance of things such as beauty, which are appreciated but less understood in the secular realm. Patronage should be a goal of the church in general, but in reality, it is a work of individuals. We need priests, bishops, cardinals, and lay people to re-embrace our historic role as patrons of the arts. Behind every great building, there are two people. Think about it: a talented architect and a visionary patron. Behind every great public work of art, there is a talented artist and a wise patron. And that doesn't mean it was easy. Think of the Sistine Chapel, an acknowledged work of genius by Michelangelo, but we give credit to Pope Julius II, who convinced the sculptor to pick up the paintbrush against his wishes and helped him to create this amazing narrative. Another example is the Medici family in Florence, who hired the top architects of their day to design their palaces, and the top painters to decorate them. They also promoted the building of one of the first new churches of the Italian Renaissance, San Lorenzo. As patrons, the Medicis also got the assistance of other families to pay for side chapels and commission worthy artists to paint altarpieces. I think they also had somebody else pay for the air conditioning. What are the things that the church as an institution, pastors, and individuals can do to promote a culture of beauty, truth, and life? I'd like to touch on three, desperately needed today. First, to find and foster the work of artists. Second, to create a market for religious art. And third, to train future artists First, to foster the work of artists. The general instruction states, in commissioning artists and choosing works of art to be admitted into a church, what should be required is that true excellence in art, which nourishes faith and devotion and accords authentically with both the meaning and the purpose for which it is intended. This is a church that we and some talented artists and decorators worked on. First, search out the finest artists. Give them projects to work on. This is risky, like investing in a startup. But the potential return is the creation of beauty. We need to research artists and compare them, even travel to see their buildings and their sculptures in the flesh. The building is a sermon in stone, and the painting is a window into the divine. In the Old Testament, one thinks of Moses hiring Bezalel to build the tabernacle in the wilderness, which would shelter the Ark of the Covenant. See, the Lord has chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he has filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of artistic crafts. Do you know Saint-Denis outside of Paris? This is the first Gothic cathedral, built by Abbot Suger, and it's where the kings of France at one time were buried. Bishop Suger writes, because of the age of the old walls and their impending ruin in some places, we summoned the best painters I could find from different regions. This is the nature of the patron, to seek out and choose the best artists and architects. And these are two wonderful altarpieces by Nielsen Carlin and Noah Buchanan in a church we did in Wisconsin. They're much better than the architecture. The patron will educate himself about the artist's work and about art in general. The way to become a connoisseur of art, of sacred art and architecture, is through reading, travel, and spending time contemplating art. This helps the patron converse with the artist and the architect and makes them a better client. The more you know about art, the more you will appreciate true talent and the hard work it takes to produce it. I think of a patron like a patron saint. He helps us in our professions and in our lives. The patron spends time with the artist, looking at their art, discussing it, and its relation to theology. The patron can help deepen the artist's theological knowledge and at the same time allow the artist to deepen his knowledge of art. This means spending time with the architect, visiting historic buildings, visiting carving workshops, and choosing materials. Of course, this is not cheap to do. What about when the artist is young? Encourage him to stick close to the tradition and seek for excellence. When the artist is mature and knows the tradition, challenge him to innovate. Push the artist to go beyond what he knows and has done before, so he can produce his best work yet. At the same time, give him respect and trust. As one of my clients once said, "Duncan, I always want to know what you think. Please tell me when you think we're going in the wrong direction." By all means, show the artist your favorite paintings of the Madonna or facades of churches, but don't require him to copy it. Allow the artist to create a relative, not a clone. Number 2, create a market for great religious art. In order for the church to form the culture, she needs to be seen as producing the best art and architecture today, works that cannot be ignored. But how can we get the best artwork? We first of all need the best artists and architects to see the church as a great client. How do we make it attractive? Half of the answer is financial, to have generous budgets. Unfortunately, the opposite is true. We get what we pay for. Piero. The reality is that we expect artists and architects to work for the church for the love of it. We think of them as a commodity and choose them based on the lowest price. This is not a recipe for creating a masterpiece. Whereas top artists and architects in the world are paid as well as people in other professions. In the past, the greatest artists worked for the church in part or in full. Today, we show how much we value the arts by not hiring the best and not being willing to pay top dollar. Why? Great art takes talent, but it also takes time. And the only way the talented artist can afford the time to give you a masterpiece is to get paid for that. The woman anointing Jesus. Another way to entice artists and architects is to make working for the church a sense of competition in which the artist is straining to build the most majestic exterior, the tallest interior, and the most spiritual iconography, and the most beautiful building. It should be like the expensive ointment the woman anoints Christ's body with, not some cheap oil bought from Walmart. Our art museums recognize the importance of historic sacred art. Are we patronizing anything today that's good enough to end up in an art museum someday? And the architecture of our churches is public and has the potential to lift up the neighborhood, the city, the region. Why aren't the top classical architects fighting to work for the church? Because the church is not seen as a patron. It has been replaced by museums, universities, corporations, and private individuals. What are some of the practical ways we can create a market for sacred art? Perhaps we could have a highly remunerated competition for sacred art and architecture to promote these ideas. Quality artwork with generous budgets, buildings with budgets that allow them to build with the best. Stone, marble, bronze, onyx, cast iron, gold leaf, and slate roofs. Look around you. We used to do this. All of our Catholic buildings should speak the same language of beauty, permanence, and transcendence. If you value education, catechesis, and even your pastor, you will build schools, halls, and rectories with artwork that reflects those values. Number 3, we need to found a sacred art academy. The purpose is to create a supply of Catholic artists who can serve both the church and the secular realm. Of the 200 Catholic colleges in America, do you know how many teach architecture? 3. 3 out of 200. And no disrespect, but there are many art departments. I don't know of any that are considered at the top. Isn't this strange? For an institution that was in the forefront of art and architecture in her 2,000-year history? Now, in America, there are reasons why poor immigrants did not focus on training in art and architecture, and perhaps even a sense that the secular realm was doing a pretty good job of it. So, I propose an art school with a theological vision to train artists in the Western tradition while understanding Catholic theories about art. This classical vision will ground them in the artistic patrimony of the Church, the figure, and the integration of art with architecture. The faculty will be made up of experienced artists who are working for the Church and for the public. Artists with expertise in the arts central to our sacred places: oil painting, fresco, sculpture in metal and stone, mosaic, and stained glass. Again, this cathedral has all of this done at a high level. Another talented young artist, this time from Spain, Raul Berzosa, who has transformed a little Baroque chapel into a magnificent place of artwork. This is the ceiling. And then another talented young sculptor from the US, Cody Swanson, who is doing wonderful sacred art. He lives in Italy for some reason. What will the students do? They will draw from casts, from life, as has been the tradition for hundreds of years. anatomy, and perspective will be taught. These students also need to have a basic competency in architecture so they can collaborate with architects. A museum of great works of art should be nearby, which the students can draw upon. A travel semester to France or Italy should be required. One model for this is the Sacred Art Academy in Florence, which I hope next summer is offering a course on painting, the Annunciation, and the Last Supper, taught by our wonderful Philadelphia maestro, Tony Visco, who's here. This is an opportunity for an artist to go to Florence, where you can study the top 10 Annunciations of all time and create your own. So the goal is threefold. Train students who can produce Catholic art at a high level. Second, give them a theological vision for ennobling our artistic culture. And third, give them the ability to create classical art for the secular realm. And this classical vision is still desired by many Americans, as evidenced by the recent debates about the Eisenhower Memorial, and then more recently, the 5 top designs in the World War I competition, including this very fine classical scheme by the Kimmel Studio for a monument to those who fought in World War I. So many of us, many Americans still want this, and this is the time to seize the opportunity. One of the reasons I believe this art school can be accomplished and that it can have an impact is that a school like this is that it's happened before. From the Academy at the Medici Villa, to the French École des Beaux-Arts, to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and many other schools in America, which train generations of top artists. There have been foundations of schools, talented professors, students, serious debate, and work that can affect the culture. Judging by the large number of classical ateliers across the country, there seems to be a groundswell of interest among artists and art students for such an academy. And this is one of the, I show this picture of Nelson Shanks because he is one of the leaders in this great movement of ateliers. Do you know him? Probably was the greatest portrait painter of the 20th century. Just passed away a few weeks ago. And he had the studio in Caminati here in Philadelphia. The second reason I believe founding an academy of sacred art is possible is that it has already been done in the field of architecture. In 1989, Thomas Gordon Smith came to the University of Notre Dame to start a classical program. He had pushback, of course, from the older faculty and the students. But in the last 25 years, it has had an enormous success and has had an influence on the church and in the culture at large. When I graduated from architecture school in 1987, there were 5 or 10 classical architecture firms in the US. Now, 30 years later, there are over 100 and growing every year. This could not have happened simply due to demand, but was caused in part by the supply of 30 to 50 classically trained architecture students into the profession each year. Certainly, the production of art is different than architecture, but I believe Notre Dame is a model that could be emulated in a Catholic art school. In conclusion, I suggest that the Church become patroness of the arts once again. To do this, she should start with what she knows best, sacred art and architecture. To foster the work of individual artists, to create a market for quality, sacred art, and to create a supply of classically trained artists. Thank you very much.